negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty is a four-step process that is about the journey of individuation. And there are many models that have been developed over the years, all of them very good. And I'm going to introduce you to some charts and models today that are my own personal version of this. So in the process of negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, what we do is we name our inner cast of characters. Then we get to know them by not only dialoguing with them, but really moving into their sphere and experiencing the energy system when we're in that place in our psyche. How does this character feel, think, act, behave? What do they do? How do they perceive things? What do they project? Because you know, when you're projecting, think about this. If you think about an inner cast of characters, if you're in your good mother is going to project one set of things. If you're in your needy child is going to project a different set of things onto the exterior world and in response to the exterior world. Depends on who you're occupying in the psyche. And again, the dream world will continually bring into your sphere new archetypal energies and new invitations to integrate more and more of the archetypal spectrum. So when we begin this journey, we may only be inhabiting a little slice of it. And over time, that spectrum begins to expand and expand. The first part of our life is spent in establishing a stable ego identity, which a lot of times the ego gets a bad rap. You know, they say, oh, you have to get rid of the ego if we're going to be on the spiritual journey. Well, the ego is very important because it helps us to remember in the morning who we are. You know, where we work, where our car keys are, who we are in relationship to other people. You know, I'm a mother and a sister and a daughter and various things. And I work here, and when I go there, I generally am in this particular self system. Helps us remember who we are. So throw out some things that you've used to identify who you are. And you don't need a microphone for this, just call them out. Creative, okay. So I'm going to start writing, and you have a handout for this, the one that has the soul print over here and the ego identity over here. That's a trait, creative, all right? So we've got creative, that's part of who she is. What else have we got?
Intelligent.
Intelligent? Okay, that's also a trait that we can easily identify ourselves with, sometimes over-identify on either one of those. Helpful, yes. Qualities and traits.
Compassionate.
Okay. Anybody got a role?
Friend. Teacher.
Okay, so teacher.
Wife.
Friend.
Woman.
Student.
Counselor.
Counselor. Companion. Mentor. Seeker. These are all archetypes. And you'll notice if you think about them, when you're in your seeker archetype, when you're in that inner character of you, that's a very different inner character than the part of you that is really helpful. Feel the difference in that energy? The part of people that is really helpful is very other-oriented, looking to see what others need, whereas the seeker typically is pretty oriented in the interior world. What am I seeking? So, you know, these are labels that we tend to identify ourselves as, and we think this is who we are sometimes. We get very deeply identified. Many people get very deeply identified with their wounds, which doesn't negate the importance of that in their life, but it is their core identity. What else? How about health? If you are a diabetic or you have a chronic disease, you think that doesn't define you in terms of your sense of identity? Okay, so our health defines us, our sexuality defines us, as sexual orientation. Our life skills define us. People who have really good communication skills. You know how when you get into, if you've done that in your life and you develop really good communication skills or relationship skills, then you think of yourself as someone who has those. And you can pride yourself in that. That's part of our identity. Values and beliefs. We're very identified with our values and beliefs, as is evidenced recently if you watch the news. people who are highly identified with one set of values over another set of values, and they're pretty fired up about it. They think their very survival is at stake because it is who they are. And that's why they're so fired up about it. What about your resume? Your achievements? You think that identifies you a bit? Yeah. Successes and failures? Have you ever known somebody who had a failure and completely collapsed in on themselves because they thought that that's who they were? That their resume or their achievements, their professional achievements, their reputation, even a reputation. We are not our reputation. It's part of the constellation of how our ego defines who we are, but it's not who we are. And then, of course, many of us have a spiritual life, and we have goals and dreams and longings, and those can very strongly shape our sense of self and who we are. So into this, there feeds something from behind, which the Jungians call the capital S self, and I like to call it the soul print. And the reason, it's the same thing, it's just a different word. I like to call it the soul print because it's as individual as your fingerprint. There are no two souls in this room who are alike. There are no two souls in this room who have the same destiny or the same constellation of all this stuff. We're all so uniquely different, and we all live in a separate anthropology. And when you're getting to know someone, it's very important to remember that they're in a separate anthropology, and the only way to really understand them is to really begin to understand what it's like to look out of their eyes from their reality. And we tend to do a lot of projecting from our anthropology and our values and achievements and traits and the things that we think are important. So into this system of ego identity, somewhere around midlife, the soul print starts to feed in dreams and life events. Now, for people who don't pay much attention to their dreams, they'll still have those life events. And those life events are always invitations into letting go of something and embracing something. Letting go of something and embracing something, because the self is constantly trying to move us towards greater wholeness. The self is trying to move us into alignment with who we were born to be, which in theological terms might be called the will of God for our lives. Except when people used to say that to me, I was always sure that if I would conform to it, then I would have to give away all my money and become a missionary in Africa. But the will of God for our lives has a lot more to do with what we're deeply drawn to, what we most deeply love, what we are most deeply attracted to, what pulls us, what moves us. That is really important information. And it has to do with your soul print, which is one of the things that, having grown up in a very Calvinistic environment, I learned to distrust that stuff. If I was drawn to it, it was probably bad. It was probably, what is that word? The depravity of man, right? It's probably depraved in some way if I was drawn to it. Well, I don't experience it that way anymore. If I'm strongly drawn to something, there's something there for me to learn or integrate or experience. And I would invite you to consider that same thing. It's a message from your soul print. And as this conversation begins, we sort of start in a sense of identity where we're pretty rooted in our ego identity. And then we have this little tug from the soul print, which says, you are more than you think you are. You are not the script you've been given. You are living someone else's life. You are living someone else's script. You are more than your wounds. You are more than your roles. And so that tug begins, and then we start this conversation, this little figure-8 conversation. We begin to wonder and doubt, and maybe pay attention to some strong dreams, and maybe come to a conference, and maybe read a book, maybe make a new friend, and we start talking about these things, and the pull continues until eventually that pull becomes so strong that we tip. And now we have one foot planted in the soul print and one foot planted in the ego, which is a very good place to be, because as lots of energy and information moves in from that soul print, You need a stable ego to begin to mediate the powerful energies that are flowing in, which are going to move you away from who you used to be. You are going to be different. You will not be the same person because you are going to let go of things and you are going to embrace things. And for as long as you're on the journey of individuation, that will be the case. And just when you think you're done, it'll start all over again. So it's sort of like you may as well just get used to it. But what's kind of, for me, what's kind of nice about it is just before I'm about to go through the meat grinder again, I think to myself, well, I've been through this meat grinder before. You know, I've been pulled into the murky deep. And I do eventually come up, or out the other side in some new form, different than the previous, and I like it better. I like it better. So we can either really struggle with this information that is coming from the soul print, or we can dance with it. We can dance with our destiny, or we can struggle and be at war with it. And to the extent that you learn to dance with it, life becomes a whole lot easier. Which is not to say that some of those little passages aren't difficult. So what happens over time is once that transfer happens, where you've now got 1 foot in the ego identity and 1 foot in the soul print, over time you will begin to reference this as the guiding force of your life. So this will actually become the center of the universe instead of the ego identity. And that's when the pipeline, which yesterday we were looking at a model where the pipeline was going up and down. So now we're just looking at a different model of that same pipeline. This is the ego-self axis. And this is the pipeline of communication with life events and dreams between the soul print and the ego identity. And as soon as you begin to pull and be open to that pipeline, all of this stuff opens up to you that was not available before. And that's why it becomes worth it. That's why it's worth it to go through this process of forming and reforming and birth, death, and resurrection, and being put through the meat grinder, or whatever you want to call it, the way you want to describe it, as being formed and reformed over and over again. Now you've got new archetypal energies because you're expanding your archetypal spectrum, and part of the way that we do that is through the integration of opposites. And part of the way that we know that we need to integrate opposites is through our projections and through the people who really, really bug us and really, really bother us, because they're carrying the medicine that we need. It doesn't mean that we become them, but they're carrying the medicine we need. There's something in that archetypal spectrum that we need to integrate there. Then we start to have quantum experiences. Experiences that are out of time, out of space, and beyond explanation. Things that so significantly change our experience of our life that our previous understandings and the meaning that we previously assigned to the events in our lives no longer applies. And that's when you get profound experiences of healing. Profound experiences of healing, because you may have been identified with a wound or a fear your entire life, and then all of a sudden you have one of these quantum experiences, and your perception, your perspective goes way large. And suddenly it's just an event, and you can look down on it and you can see how that led to this, led to this, led to that, and truly how one of your greatest wounds has become one of your greatest gifts. And it was all part of destiny all along. And it looks very different, and more importantly, it feels very different. And periodically you will have healing dreams, for example. I remember a dream I had a while back in which I was graduating, and I went across the stage and a woman put a golden cord around my neck. And as she put the golden cord around my neck, and this was the important part of the dream, I had this sort of X-ray vision into all of the fissures in my psyche. All the places where I was shattered and hurt, all of the fissures. And into those fissures was flowing this beautiful, incredible balm, this light, this golden light. And I could see all of the fissures being healed. So it was like something that was utterly shattered became completely whole. All the fractures just knit shut in the midst of that. It was such a powerful dream. When I woke from it, the feeling, the energetic feeling in my body was so amazing. And I returned to that dream. I held that dream like a little pearl for a long time and returned to it over and over again as a meditation. I stayed with it, which I would encourage you to do with really powerful images and really powerful dreams. Hold them and treasure them and stay with them. And I still return to that dream periodically because I can still feel the energy of what it was like to have all the fissures be healed, and how powerful that was. So these are the kinds of quantum experiences. You'll have expanded perspectives, healing and intuition, significant more compassion for self and others. And I'll tell you, it's very interesting, and I learned this from Hal Stone, who's one of my great teachers. Oftentimes we seek to be non-judgmental and we seek to be compassionate. If you're on the path, this is an important value for many people on the spiritual path, is to not be judgmental and to be compassionate. Well, you can't just say, I'm going to be non-judgmental and I'm going to be compassionate. It doesn't work that way. The way that it works is that the person that you're judging, you take whatever the quality it is in that person that you're judging. And Hal Stone has this great story. He talks about taking that person and taking them out to a big black cooking pot in the backyard and cooking them down into a little tincture. And then you take 3 homeopathic drops of the tincture. In other words, the whole thing about homeopathy is you introduce the poison, and then your body begins to learn how to be with that in a different way. So you take just little doses of those qualities and you integrate them into your system. It doesn't mean you become that person, but you just move a little bit off what you thought was center, which is probably way off on one side. And as you move a little bit closer to this, you'll notice your judgment of that person reduces. Oftentimes people talk about shadow. They talk about, or if I'm judging something in others, it must be something in myself that I don't see or that I don't like. And I'd like to kind of shift that a little bit, because what I'm saying to you is often when you judge others, it's because that quality is overly missing in you. Overly missing. It's not something that you don't want to face. It's something you need. So for instance, last night we were working a little bit around setting better limits. And we did a little visualization where the person integrated a little bit more anger. So again, one of the functions of anger is to set a limit. Now, we don't want to become a raging, angry person, but if you're a person who can't house the energy of anger, you need a few drops of that to get you going, to get you motivated, to find a voice. You need a few drops of that. So oftentimes, we'll judge the really angry, rageful person, but that's the medicine that we need, the homeopathic medicine we need. So that's how you become less judgmental and more compassionate, is you continue to do your work of integrating opposites. Integrating opposites is the ticket for that one. As you begin to reference the soul print more and more, your spiritual gifts will begin to develop and become evident. And you'll develop a sense of core strength, because you're not as attached to all of this ego identity stuff as you once were. And so when someone shoots down something that is important to you, it just doesn't impact you as much as it used to. You have more of a sense of balance, of an ability to kind of flow around, and a sense of core strength. And that all leads to a sense of inner peace.